Hi there, we're doing it this at last, so thank you for making the time today. I know you've been really keen, and me too, to get together to talk about men's mental health.
Yes.
And we're recording this in the middle of November. I think the timing's pretty good given it's November.
Agreed.
And it's the time focusing particularly on men. I think we've got a few things, haven't we, to go through, but I shared with you some of the research, the results from the research on loneliness.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm really interested to get your thoughts on what you think on some of those. I start with just actually who responded, because did this research, put an ad on Facebook targeted at men and women of all adult ages, and the response was heavily in favour, if you like, of women. So 72%, 552 responses from women, and 26 from men, 199 responses. And I suppose that's probably not a surprise. But to me anyway, what were your response when you saw that?
No, I thought the same. I thought it was a stark difference between the responses between men and women, and what could the reasons be for that? It's generally understood that women are perhaps more open to mental health issues and the conversation than men are. So perhaps that's there. Men perhaps saw it and decided they didn't need to talk about it or didn't want to talk about it. You know, I'm okay, I'm not lonely, I don't need to talk about it. Then other guys perhaps do feel they want to, but didn't feel able to. And then you perhaps have the smaller amount of guys who did feel they want to have the conversation. And then as well, like I say, the looking at the numbers, I mean, it's obvious that men, given the proportion of people you've spoken to, men feel more lonely than women. It's not a major surprise. Obviously, it's issues of men's mental health is becoming more and more relevant. And say we're talking about November and other sorts drives, and it just makes me wonder what's behind that. And I say, kind of wanting to know more, wanting to know who the guys are that are responded and why are they responding. Also, the ones that didn't respond, why didn't they respond? Was it a case of they didn't feel they need to? I'm fine. Next page, or actually they didn't feel comfortable doing it because of stereotypes and stigmas associated with men's mental health. And as well, within the data you provided me, it has the different questions, the top 3 questions that women answered and men answered.
Yeah, and actually, I think, because forgive me, just to interrupt you a second there, because I think that those first 2 bits, sort of the proportions that replied, and the indication that men are more lonely than women, but that's almost telling us what we already know. We know that the suicide rate in men is higher than it is in women. We know it's our expectation that men are less likely to engage with things like mental health than women are.
Yeah.
Hopefully things are changing, but it's like, oh, okay, a bit of a so what, and then what you just started to allude to is actually then when I think it starts to get really interesting, and whilst it might still raise more questions, it's starting to give us a feel for what's going on here. And I think so I'll just do a bit of explanation. So what the research was, it was 20 questions that then, depending on the answers that you gives a loneliness score. It's based on a questionnaire design, which is the questionnaire designed by UCLA back in the 90s, and it's been used extensively around the world for loneliness research. What I really liked about it was that it doesn't say, do you feel lonely? Or how lonely do you feel, or anything that really and none of it includes the word lonely except the title of the questionnaire.
Yeah.
It's all about those aspects that actually result in loneliness.
Yeah.
Like, for example, how often do you feel that no one really knows you well, which happens to be the top question, or as in the one that drives loneliness more. I'll come on to what I mean by that in a minute, because of this idea that, and I don't, something I think this is relevant for men maybe, where sort of what does loneliness look like? It's not that, oh, I feel lonely, it is the feeling angry. And I'm going to stereotype men, and so you can argue. Feel free to argue with me if I'm wrong. It is anger and frustration. It's hitting the booze. That kind of drinking every night, 2 or 3 beers or whatever, which but every night.
Yeah.
Those kind of things where actually that would indicate loneliness and lack of connection, rather than, sitting, feeling empty and lonely. Is that a fair
it's, I mean, there's the empty feeling and lonely, but actually, those perhaps aren't the words that men would use. There's other feelings like ignored, overlooked, disregarded, and actually, I think they're almost the precursor, or they're the surfaced symptom of feeling lonely. No one listens to me. I say something, everybody ignores me. I think that's what it is. But you could say to a guy, do you feel lonely or do you feel ignored? They wouldn't say they feel lonely because they're perhaps surrounded by people. But I think it's their grip on what they think loneliness is. And I say that survey asks a multitude of questions and gives you a matrix to kind of look at and different ways of thinking about it rather.
Yeah, and that's why I loved it so much. And then where this survey really becomes interesting is looking, as you just said, is the difference between men and women. So if you get a high score, I have to put it in speech marks because it sounds wrong that we're converting a feeling into score, but a high score means more lonely.
Yeah.
And actually the data, I can give a score against each question and then rank them. Yeah. And if at the top of the rank, it's the one that people are feeling most. I think it's easy when I describe the data. So how often do you feel no one really knows you well?
Yeah.
That was the question that people most would be put sometimes somewhere between sometimes and always. Those where quite a lot of the time that's the worst, that's where they feel it most keenly.
Yeah.
I need to get better at describing this, by the way. It's hard to kind of, I'm a mathematician and a psychotherapist. It's really hard to use language that isn't of a mathematician and a psychotherapist when actually I'm so this is helpful practice and that better. So whether it was male, female, and any age group, like no one really knows you well. So that was one that's consistent. But that's it. When you get into the data, let's have a look at it, the difference between men and women. So whereas women said it was more about feeling they were being left out, and people around you not with you, whereas with men it's interests and ideas not shared and lacking of companionship.
So I think, in my way of looking at it, it sounds like women are feeling they're lacking sort of a deeper level of connection. They're looking for that bit more. They know there are people around them, but perhaps people don't get them. I think with men, I think it's more about them feeling they don't perhaps know that there's people around them, but they're feeling overlooked and ignored. And that kind of, when I sat here and thought about it, and I say I was ruminating, that carries forward to my experiences when I go and see friends of mine, because one thing's come out of sort of COVID and the rest of it, I have made contact with people I previously lost contact with. And there's lots of instances, well, two separate instances, and it's very, very noticeable, where I go to see my friend who's a male, and we're having a chat about whatever. Then his wife turns up, or his girlfriend turns up, and for whatever reason, that's just the dynamic of their relationship, they take over the conversation. And I'm no longer talking to him, I'm talking to her, and he's just occasionally chipping in when he's allowed to. And it's I don't really have any answers for that, but it was noticeable. And I think there's a lot of, as kind of like say, we talked about it before, being middle-aged at 42, I'm now officially middle-aged. I think a lot of the times as you get older.
Sorry for being the one that had to break that news to you.
I don't mind. You are correct. It's been corroborated by the sources. It's fine. But I do notice as more of my friends now, as we're getting older, the men lose their social circle, or it becomes less and less and less. It becomes more fragmented. It becomes thinner. Whereas the women's social circle stays quite live and quite active, and the men tend to get rolled in as part of the woman's social circle. So the men actually have fewer of their own connections, and I don't want to say they're an accessory to the woman's social circle, but it's it's very woman centric, and I see that quite often. Now my situation is slightly different. I've been single for a while, so I kind of my friends tend to be a mixture of people who are single and are attached, and I do notice that difference, that the guys who are attached they do feel a bit overlooked, a bit overshadowed. They don't always tend to do the things that they want to do. Perhaps they don't surface it when they're talking to the missus, or they're not allowed to. But there is definitely this, and I say your research for me corroborated that. They do feel a little bit ignored, overlooked, superfluous, all those sorts of things, really. And I don't think many of them would say that they feel lonely. They feel ignored, overlooked, superfluous. And I think that's the difference. It's linking those two thought processes together.
Ignored, overlooked, superfluous.
Yeah, and even if you kind of if you look at sort of like TV culture, on programs, often the men are seen as being slightly, eccentric, inferior, whatever. And I don't know, perhaps that may be me making a thumping generalization, but often blokes are made to look a bit, there's the gender gap, and sometimes men are made to look on TV, made to look, I don't know, inferior or, bumbling and the rest of it. I don't know, that might be me just noticing that and picking up on that, but I do tend to see that sometimes on TV.
There's something about sort of those, I don't know, I'm going to say stereotypes. So the way things are presented on telly, where we see, and actually perhaps a stereotype of a male-female relationship, where there's that, which is perhaps what you're seeing is confirming what you're observing in your connections, that actually someone represent the female in a relationship representing the man, rather than and somehow it's kind of, you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't, you're just almost I don't know what the right word is though, what the phrase is.
I hear the conversation like when
feel right. Sorry, again.
Yeah, no, it's when you have these, so when I have these been to see, like my friend and his wife was there, and don't worry, she's lovely, but she will answer questions for him. We think this, don't we? We do this, don't we? And I sat there looking at him thinking, do you? Feel free to chip in any time. But I don't know, I see it more often, and it's, as I've got older, I've noticed it more and more. No, it's not all of them, not all like it, but I have noticed a definite shift in that way. And I'm saying it's borne out by some of the things you've talked about and looked at in the questionnaire and the figures that were produced.
I know something that you'll know. I suppose I really struggle with, because I really feel as though when it comes to the gender stereotypes, which are proven, this isn't just someone sitting, stroking their metaphorical beard and coming up with a theory. It's been proven that actually in terms of nature and nurture, there isn't that much difference between men and women in terms of the gene pool. It's actually how we're brought up and actually what we're to expect. And as long as we keep saying women are this, women are better at this, men are better at that, and that's then the more it's going to happen. The number of women who despite having high-flying careers, take the cleaning responsibility. And I really noticed it, because it's all right before lockdown when they had cleaners, so it wasn't really obvious until they were the ones saying, "I'm having to do the cleaning," and it's like, why? Why are we not building relationships that are equal?
But there's a whole bigger picture around, let's say, and it's like the gender gap, and that's another subject entirely. But it almost seems to be like the women, although have those sorts of roles stereotypically, but they tend to be seen as being the more insightful, the more intelligent, whereas the man may be the guy with the job and the rest of it, but actually is a bit of a bumbling fool at times. And it's a whole bigger question. And I say in some ways it does bear out into what I see when I'm kind of going and talking to people.
And I really noticed you said bumbling fool at least twice, maybe 3 times, definitely. And I'm writing it down. It's like that's really interesting, that from a male point of view. And I'm not saying I don't see that, but actually that's
it might be if you asked a woman or female the same question, she may see things totally different to me. Perhaps I'm a bit more switched on to that. Perhaps that's something that annoys me just a little bit. Like my circumstances are perhaps different to other people's, but I do see that it's almost this American sitcom where the woman's at home looking after the kids and all the rest of it, but she's actually really, really bright. And say the husband is this other kind of character, and I don't know. Maybe I just notice it more, or maybe it is actually there. I don't,
And I'm curious about it, and You can always edit this out if you want near the end.
No, that's fine.
Put a pause in. I'll put another pause in. Whether there's something, because your situation with you having the kids at least 50% of the time.
Yeah.
So you have to run the house. You do the washing, the cooking, you do. Just I needed to even say that out loud. You do run the house. You don't get people
in my house. If I don't do it, it doesn't happen. So there's no
just your house. It's the normal person's house.
Yeah.
It's clear. It's as clean and tidy as a house with 2 young boys can ever be.
Yeah.
It's
if you'd know if
time looks like mine and I've no excuse.
If you walked into my house, you'd probably realise it's a blokes only house because of it's not got a lot of the flourishes that go perhaps with the female touch. But we keep it clean and tidy, and I look after the house and I do the job as well. What I do,
I actually disagree. It's not even like a bloke's house. You can tell. I thought you were going to say because it's got Nerf guns and trainers everywhere, but those are girls' houses. Even I've just stereotyped, but I think the point is you go to your house and you don't go, well, you can tell it's a bloke. You actually don't go, you can tell it's a bloke's house because look, it's a tip, it's dirty, there's no wash. They just wear dirty clothes. None of that. That is not your home. And I wonder how much some of that plays into, because there's a stereotype on the one hand, men don't do that, but actually, yes, they do. And it's
well, some do. I mean, this is kind of, again, it's a little bit tangential, but friends of mine who are either in the same situation as me or heading towards the same situation as me, they have a real big wake-up moment when they work out how much work is involved with domestic arrangements and keeping a house going and the rest of it. They don't realise how much is actually done that they don't see or don't appreciate. And it is hard. And when you see those sort of stereotypical views of blokes, like I say, not a lot of them don't appreciate what happens, but we're not all like that. And I think that can lead into feelings of there's plenty of guys like me who do it, but we don't necessarily have. Women seem to be better at having the support group around them. So a lot of again, it's what I see. But when I certainly had when the kids were much smaller, a lot of the kid groups were very mum centric. And as a single dad, trying to be part of that for no other reason than to get the kids involved was quite difficult because I was on my own. And actually, talk to my friends now, some of my friends now, we try and do stuff with kids. It's a very different experience. I'm there happy. I can cope with the kids. We can deal with all of it, the tantrums, the whatever, all the rest of it. It's fine. Doesn't really faze me. Been there, done it. Whereas some other dads who don't have the kids all the time and are very, very career centered, they get the kids and it's a very stressful experience for them. And again, I'm darting around a little bit, but I think it's all part of this biggest what's expected of men, what's expected of women, and actually what loneliness means to us. And I think a lot of that reverts back to what we think is expected of us. Women look for the deeper connection; they have a lot of it already. Whereas men, it's I've got my opinion, and it will be listened to, and we need to almost do what I want to do. It's for me, it's a massive picture. It's a huge cloud, and it's all bits that feed into it.
Yeah, and because there's sort of nice. I like the way you segued back into the questions. So thank you for that. It's this idea of women have their networks for whatever reason and able to maintain them. That sort of base connection is there, and for them it's like I want a deeper connection, and for what end, whereas men are actually just feel ignored,
they just want a connection, if I'm honest.
Just want a connection of some kind, and having perhaps been I want to come back because I keep saying for whatever reason that the lives become combined, and then it's more the men move to the male moves to the female's circle rather than actually somehow a joint mixing. It'd be interesting, and I'm sure people are watching this may have some different views with what we're talking about, but actually this is really interesting. And for me, I think, and we're talking about connection, and as part of connection between in a couple and with a family, it's actually that conversation, those negotiation agreements about family roles, about who's doing what, and there's something about even you know, those things are happening, but neither party's happy with it.
Yeah.
It's not that the negotiation's not happy, what maybe you know, male or female, somebody's happy with it.
Yeah.
Actually neither party is, and then it causes problems because there's that tension of things aren't getting done, or you know, nagging me or whatever, and that stereotype's still there even today. Does my head in.
Kids, I mean, the care of kids is a really acute demonstration of that. What I see a lot of is you have, generally within a family, it tends to be the women who, particularly when the kids are younger, are leading in the arrangements and care of the kids. The women aren't happy about that. They wish the men would do more. The men aren't happy about it. They wish they could do more, but they either feel that they aren't able to or they aren't allowed to. Yeah. And I can think of straight off, I won't mention the names. I can think of couples of families at the moment who live in that way. And I guarantee I can go and say to the wife, sort of, is he not doing very much anymore? And she'll say, oh yes, he's terrible. He's not doing this, this, and this. Go and say to him, he's still not really getting much chance to do stuff with the kids. No, I'm not allowed to. And if I do it, it's always wrong. And you can almost write it down for them. You can almost write the script. And again, it's this, whether they're being, typecast, they feel they're being typecast into this role, sort of, it's your responsibility as a man to go and do X, Y, and Z. It's your responsibility as a woman to do A, B, and C. I just think there needs to be more transference across. And I think if there was more of that, I think men and women would potentially, their needs to satisfy their loneliness could be met in that way. Maybe, women perhaps would feel more, who do women want to have this deeper level of connection with? Is it the husband or is it other people? The men, they want to have a bit more buy-in, bit more, not commitment, bit more of a connection with anybody. Well, actually, if they're allowed to become part of the decision-making process, maybe more with the kids or home or holidays, maybe they'll get that. And actually this X, Y, and Z, A, B, C, when it comes together, maybe that actually will help in some way. I don't know. It's just, theory, really.
And interesting that top question, as I said, that both genders, how often do you feel that no one really knows you well? And actually, if you're in a relationship, there's that, you've got someone on your doorstep where you could perhaps develop that. And I know in my work, that's often that conversation, whether it's with individuals or with couples, about how people can have those conversations productively. And it's not and I can spout all the theory and it's not easy, but actually kind of always got to try, really.
Yeah, I mean,
both parties have to be open to it. Both parties have to be open to it.
I mean, there's plenty of people I know and they just don't talk to their partner. They live together and they've been married for 20 years, 15, or together for 15, 20 years, but they don't talk that often, probably because they're so busy, flying out the door to take kids to do this, or flying out the door because they've got to do something for work, or playing squash, going to the gym, going for a run, going to the shops, whatever. But they don't actually spend much time talking to each other. And that's quite evident. That's quite obvious at times as well. And often I think women maybe deal with that by having a support group, a network to support them. And actually they go and talk there, but they're looking for the connection with their partner. I mean, certainly from my own experiences, there is a definite difference between how women support and how men support within my own group of friends. Not all of them, but in the main, male friends are a bit useless, and I'm happy to say that. And if anybody wants to shoot me down, they can do. My female friends have been the ones who have helped me, supported me, listened to me, and the rest of it. In the main, it's not totally, but that's the numbers in my head. That's how it is. And certainly now, if there's something happening, and perhaps I need to talk to somebody or something, I probably wouldn't pick up the phone or make contact with many of my male friends, if any. But there's certainly some of my female friends who, I know I can start the conversation, not feel like I'm burdening them, and they'll help me with it. And they probably won't actually give me any answers, but just having that vehicle to talk, I feel better. But don't get that with the blokes. And we've talked about in the past, the men's health thing, men's walk, men's talk. I think there needs to be more of that. But
I think there's something about those. I wonder if there's something about the listening skills that, because if as a stereotyped gender, you're not, you don't see it around. If you grew up and spent your adult life around people who don't speak to each other or don't listen, which is the key thing, is yes, got to talk, but someone's got to listen too. how do you learn that skill if you don't seen it, you haven't been taught it? So it's perhaps an opportunity on listening skills.
Yeah.
I was going to press pause because I know that we could talk about this. There's so many avenues we could go down.
It's already,
really,
yeah.
You want to talk about, so we've got a second subject on the agenda. So yeah, go for it. It was more.
To be honest with you, I don't know what else there is to say. We've kind of covered the bits I was going to do.
Yeah, cool.
I mean, it's gone in a direction I wasn't really expecting, but there you go.
They have a habit of doing that.
No, well, I mean, I was going to talk about. So I was wanting to talk about the loneliness thing and how it relates to men and sort of in a work context. But we've kind of drifted into men and loneliness in a home context, which I think actually is probably something that doesn't always get picked up.
Okay, right. So actually, yeah, interesting. Can you say more on that? Because I'm honestly, I was a bit torn because I want to say, go on, talk about loneliness in the workplace. No, but then really, I don't want.
Like I say, I think my view is a lot of the focus on men's health that comes out now tends to be about men's work. So it's almost industry specific. So they talk about the fact that the construction industry has a high proportion of male suicides, but I don't think a lot's done about or talked about is about the male mental health and the male situation within a domestic environment. And I think that's possibly where the loneliness element comes in, because at work, work in a building site, you're going to be surrounded by other guys, and there's the banter, #bants, and all that, which feels good. But then when you get home, you perhaps feel rubbish, and they perhaps get into a situation where you're thrown into a way of dealing with it. And that can be you withdraw at home, and as you said, you go and have 4 or 5 beers or a bottle of wine every night, and that's when dad's a bit grumpy or my husband's a bit grumpy and he just snaps at me and stuff, but maybe there's something behind it and they're not getting it. They deal with it during the day because they're in this male environment where they can, maybe it's even like a persona, maybe it's even like a facade that they're acting out, a character they're acting out. It's not actually really who they are. And I think that gets overlooked, and there's not really the emphasis on maybe how men are at home within that environment. The work environment's very important because that's where your career is and you put a lot into it. But then if you're at home and you're surrounded by your family and you've got your kids and you don't feel your kids particularly, you're overlooked by your kids. And so I don't feel this way, but you're overlooked by your kids because, mum's the one that sorts stuff. So we just don't need to bother talking to dad, sort of thing. It must be quite hard. And they're saying, do you deal with it by drinking? I don't know. How do you deal with it?
And so something about the going to work, sort of putting the mask on, and being the bloke is what can be putting that, and bants, and yeah, I'm curious but then sort of going home and that piece around actually not feeling part of the family, feeling ignored, overlooked and superfluous in the family, and maybe there's something, actually work could be the place where they're gaining connection, and while of mental health sort of in the workplace, and I would sort of agree, because I actually often, and it's really hard to generalize actually, but I'm going to anyway, is this sort of being at work, being able to put the mask on. And it's not sometimes it can be about work being stressful, but it can actually be more that home's stressful and it means performing at work becomes really difficult.
Yeah.
It's hard to generalize because there are some people who the workplace isn't right either. So
there is. I mean, I'd say, but from what I see, I think for me personally, the workplace is quite not controllable, but I can get a handle on that. That's like, I know what resources I need to put into work to make work, if there's a problem, to fix it. And it's usually, time, need to do this, need to talk to those guys. But it's the kind of time at home when I'm dealing with things that perhaps I've got such a great handle on, or perhaps aren't even within my control. That's the jack in the box that can cause me the problems. And I do wonder whether there's a lot of guys in that way. As I say, that they have almost like the alpha male persona for work. They then go home and they go from being this alpha male character who's the life and soul of the party to perhaps somebody who is just ignored, overlooked, etc. And it may be as well that, I mean, I've heard this before where guys, their response is, "I'm just here to bring the money in. You lot just ignore me." And I can remember my own dad spouting that. He goes out, he earns the money, and that's all he's there for. Anything else, maybe gets to mow the lawn if he's lucky. That sort of thing. And I say a lot of the focus, I think, on men's health is around, and obviously the studies are industry based and things like that. But I do wonder whether a lot of it is their home life as well, and how they're viewed there, not just the pressure at work. As I said, I'm repeating myself, but work can be stressful, but can deal with that. I go on courses to deal with that. I've been on courses to deal with it, but no one put me in a course to dealing with stuff in home life. I've had to kind of muddle through with that, and men have to kind of muddle through and sort that ourselves. And we don't necessarily have that support network of shared knowledge that perhaps the women have, that have tried A, B, and C, and this worked and that didn't work, and maybe try this. We just don't have that. And I think perhaps men feel a little bit marooned and isolated in that way.
And if the role models that you had, because your dad, I just went out to get the money, and therefore that was his role in the family, which sounds like he would have liked to have been more involved in the family. But that's what as a man, if that's what you see, then going, okay, how do I do something different? Are we just expected to go like that? And it's again about finding that shared experience, other people that I've tried this, I've tried that, so you can actually learn. And perhaps that's where the power of some kind of men's groups, I guess, come into play. Where I've heard of ones where it's that Chatham House rules of what we discuss here. In fact, it's more than that. It's truly confidential. It's not. But actually, it's exploring those issues freely and openly. Of stereotypes versus what you really want to take the mask off. I
mean, I do less of the talking with my friends in many ways than I used to do. I mean,
I got a question I wonder what it would be like, because you're talking about focus on work. Is it actually at home and they're putting the mask on? And I wonder, and again, it is a question as I'm curious that what it would be like in those very male-dominated industries, and we're talking construction simply because that's your profession, what it would be like if everyone took their masks off at work. Not literally in a health and safety point of view, in a metaphorical mask. We won't want people taking off their safety masks. Is that what it's like? Would people be taking off their safety mask?
I think it would be. I mean, that's one thing. I mean, sort of firms I've worked for previously, you get to know people. So straight away on a job, you have a number of people working with you, for you, and you sort of take them at face value to begin with. But then you get to know them, and you realise that perhaps there's more to it. And my experience is like the person beneath is very different to the person I'm seeing. And as a manager, you can not use that to your advantage, but it can help you to motivate those people and keep them happy. But I think, I mean, if you were to go on a building site, I would imagine the people that you see, the person that you see doing the work or on the building site, or ranting and raving or waving plans at people, will be very different in a home life. I mean, there's firms there's a firm I used to work for many years ago, and I went to one of the guys' houses to drop some plans off, and the person who met me at the door was not the person who was on site during that day. Wasn't a bad person at all, but just very, very different. And I was a little bit taken aback. Didn't make me think any less of him, but he wasn't the same person he was a few hours before when we sat in a meeting.
So, yes, that's really interesting. So, I will ask the question is, do you think, and I'm only hesitating because it sounds like a very leading question, because you'll know, is the mask a good or a bad thing?
I think it's a necessary thing. I think overall it's probably a bad thing, but it's what they have to do, what perhaps we have to do to keep going forward. I think ultimately it's a bad thing, but I think at the moment it's a necessary thing.
No, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, I don't think you're going to, I think, I'm trying the best way to describe it. Yes, it's definitely, it's not a good thing that the guys do it, but I think it's a necessary thing. I think there has to be, it's like rolling the snowball, isn't it? There has to be the small steps to gather pace, then actually perhaps people feel more comfortable in opening up. And I think that's a lot to do with it as well. It's having, within the all-male environment, it's having the confidence or the certainty that if you were to expose yourself in some way, shape or form, a weakness, say a weakness or something that perhaps the people didn't wear, you're not going to be ridiculed for it or thought less of. I do know some people who work in different industries, different sectors, when they have surfaced mental health problems, they definitely feel it's been detrimental to their career, and they are now, marked as being, in inverted commas, weak because they surfaced this problem. Whereas actually, if they'd have gone off and found solace in a bottle of whiskey, well, they're one of the lads, aren't they? It's fine, it's great. Yeah. I think it's so sad.
And so what would it take for that to change?
I think it's just, I think it's just the change. I think it's a good question. I think it's
attitudes. How do we change it? Where do we start?
I don't know where to start. I mean, it's so roll it back all the way to where we first started. They have this persona because perhaps they're not necessarily getting the level of engagement they want at home because they don't feel they can because of stereotypes. I think it almost goes back to that. And hopefully subsequent generations look at it differently. Hopefully my kids look at it differently. But maybe men need to learn to step forward a little bit. And maybe women need to learn to maybe step back a little bit. I don't know. Which is not the answer you wanted.
No, I didn't. No, it's a question that I think, that the world is dealing with. It's like, that's okay. You can see the end point. Yeah. So strategic planning, it's like, well, one is actually that it's not a mask because there's no need for a mask. Because it's acceptable, it's okay to say how you feel, but actually people feel better anyway.
Yeah.
So their life and general, they feel more connected. So they have the mask is smaller anyway.
Yeah.
So you're not being a completely different person.
I think it's men being comfortable to be able to be honest, because there's a lot. I don't think they're always being honest with themselves or other people about perhaps who they are and what their feelings are. And then it bubbles away and turns into something else: resentment, aggression, substance abuse. I don't know, all those sorts of things. But I think it's the process that's perhaps started is to raise the awareness and actually to say it's okay to talk about mental health in the male context. It's not an admission of weakness, and maybe that can feed into the fact that perhaps at the home life, if men aren't happy with it, instead of just becoming grumpy dad who sits in front of the TV drinking beer all night or is really snappy when anybody asks him anything, because there are those people who are like that. Perhaps they can say to the wife, actually, I'm finding this quite difficult, or the partner, can I start do X, Y, and Z? Yeah. And maybe can you involve me in the conversations with this a little bit? And there's going to be times I'm tired from work, but I'd like to do more. I don't know of many, I could be wrong on this, but I can't think of many guys that I've spoken to who have actually ever said to their wife or their partner that I'd like to do more. They just take it as read that they can't. They want to, but they're not allowed.
It's really interesting. So, and as you were talking, I was thinking, hopefully, so maybe some of this, whether it's around the FA and the work they're doing with mental health, and generally in more public, actually that increasing the acceptability.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, if even men in our 40s, we still, in some ways, we still need role models. Again, my boys need a role model, which is me, but maybe I still need, if men my age or even me, if I see a rugby player that I hold in esteem, or an Arctic explorer, if I see Bear Grylls on TV, which he does, talking about mental health, that not sanitizes it, but it makes it easier for me to talk about it.
Yeah, it's part of the normal, it's just day to day, it's on TV all the time, and even during yes. Oh no, COVID. Sorry, I said the word. We were going to try not to. It's just this time when it is being talked about more because of the pandemic. So actually, maybe that again, it would be a part actually of positive change. So something might be impacting us negatively may ultimately be good.
I think it is. I mean, this, as I said, since in the first lockdown, I've made more effort with people, and also I've noticed other people make more effort. And we do talk more about how COVID makes us feel.
Yeah.
So I'm having a call at some point with a friend, and it'll be a Zoom call because we obviously can't go and see them and have a beer and the rest of it. And it'll be, how are you feeling? And we'll talk about the fact that we're feeling this or that or the other, or we're happy or unhappy. And I think that's the starting point, and that can open up bigger conversations into, well, actually, how's things at home? Because at the moment, it would have to be someone I knew fairly well to prompt the conversation about how are you feeling at home. There's been times when people who I've worked with, I've known that there's problems at home, and in a private setting, I've said, how's things? Is it still not great, or is it sorted itself out? But it's quite an awkward conversation, and it's what people have talked about with men's health, men's mental health. It's just take the stigma away, or just try and get rid of the stigma, and then hopefully people can talk more about everything. Not that that's always the solution, but it's certainly a step along the way. I certainly feel better when I've, if something's winding me up and I've talked about it, I've not come to any solutions or conclusions, but just the fact I've talked about it, I feel better.
Yeah. Who knew?
Exactly. It is. I mean, I don't know. I mean, perhaps not for this what we're doing now, but yesterday when we met at Attenborough, I don't know why, I had a bit of a face like a smacked arse. Don't know why. Yeah. But as I was driving away, I felt like it was better.
Yeah. Well, that'll be a combination of many things. It is about have to make an effort. Chocolate cake.
Yeah.
Being outside in the rain, outside, good company, and now to go blah 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 for 2 hours, whatever we did, and then move on. Definitely, and there's so much happened this year for mental health. Yesterday on Country File, it was all about, there was something, believe it or not, I couldn't believe it, Shinrin-yoku. Do you know when I was telling you all about it a year ago? And we were like, well, as though it was some mystery. I don't mean that this is like it was some like mystery science, and I had to do quite a lot of research to get a book and find out more about it and really get into it. And then only a year later, suddenly it's on, Country File is also on Springwatch, and suddenly it's all really, so I sort of caught the wave, and that's one of the really exciting things about this year, is that connection with nature, about people really realizing it is just 15 minutes a day engaging with nature, which could be simply looking out your window. That's it. Is better for your mental health. Is good for your mental health.
I must admit, since I've had the office at Ransom Wood, which has been for a while now, I mean, you talk to people around me. Mum, she made mention the other day that it seems to work really well for you being there, doesn't it, Mike? And I was kind of, one of Mum's kind of like rambling throwaway conversations, like, what do you mean? She said, well, when you were working in Nottingham and stuff, you kind of seemed to be a lot more, whether the job was just different, but the fact that you seem to be able to go into the woods and the rest of it and take the dog for a walk, it just seemed to make a difference. And I do, this is not me advertising Ransom Wood, but when I do drive onto the business park and kind of park up in my car and I see my office and there's all the trees and all the leaves and the rest of it, it is generally quite a nice feeling. I did look at maybe changing offices a while ago to one in Hucknall, which was a more usual aluminium-clad glass building with a rectilinear plastered box with lights and windows, and the money was very, very similar. But what kept me was the setting. I didn't want to go to a rectilinear aluminium box on the corner of an industrial estate.
Just rather stay in the mental hospital.
Exactly. I'd rather stay in a mental hospital with the ghosts and the trees and the squirrels.
Well, thank you, Mike. Kind of a bit out of time there, and I just feel we could have talked all afternoon about it, as we generally do anyway. And yes. I'm glad we were finally able to actually get something on video, and I really appreciate it. So no problem. I will see you soon.
You will. Thanks, Michelle.
Bye. See ya.